And as special advisors, you're neither elected nor accountable to the public.
That is broadly correct, yes. I always felt accountable to the public.
But in terms
not
of the formal,
formally.
Not formally. And your role is generally not meant to be public-facing, unlike the politicians, is it?
That's correct.
And some special advisors can build up close relationships with their ministers, having worked with them over many years. Is that correct?
That is.
And is it fair to say that your relationship with Nicola Sturgeon was particularly close, having worked as her Chief of Staff since 2015?
Yes, and certainly by the time of the pandemic.
And is it fair to say that you were one of her closest confidants?
Yes, I would say so.
Can we turn to your first statement, which is on the screen now? It's paragraph 29 and page 8. And here you say, "My advice during this period was on the general tenor of the actions being taken, managing public response and the communication of the actions being taken. I played a role on the First Minister's behalf in asking clinicians and officials for more and better advice and raising questions on further action, and acted as a sounding board, thought partner for the First Minister and others." Are you able to tell me what you mean by thought partner?
Ministers, the First Minister, but other ministers as well, would receive advice from scientists. They would be looking at, broader information on legislative proposals, policy proposals, and sometimes ministers need a place or a person where they can essentially think out loud without that being taken as their definitive view. So my role and the role of other special advisors frequently is to engage with them, to help them stress test ideas, to talk out what might the consequences of a particular route of action be, help them come to, are there other questions they should ask? Do they have all the information they need? And to help them explore, if you like, the advice and information before them.
So in the context of a particular decision that the First Minister or another minister needs to make, there may be competing considerations. There may be competing almost briefings coming from different interests, whether it be economic, whether it be scientific or medical. And part of the role of the special advisor is to be able to almost stress test the different, perhaps conflicting advice so that the minister can make the decision.
Yes.
In your statements, and I won't take you to this particular part, but I think you say that it would be normal for you to attend decision-making meetings with the First Minister where she was in attendance. And this included meetings with the Scottish Government Cabinet, the Scottish Government Resilience Room, the Gold meetings, Cobra meetings, and the Four Nation calls with Boris Johnson and Michael Gove. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it's fair to say that you were a particularly important part of the Scottish Government's response to the pandemic until at least March 2021. Is that correct?
That's for others to judge, but I was certainly there and certainly participating in the response.
You were there in almost all the important
Yes.
meetings and in the rooms where the decisions were being made?
Yes.
And you were the thought partner or the sounding board for the First Minister when it came to stress testing perhaps the different conflicting advice that was being received?
Yes.
And there would be, I think, is it fair to say, there'd be very few people within the Scottish Government that would perhaps be in the room for all the key meetings with the First Minister during the course of the pandemic?
During the course of the pandemic, it was common there would be a few other people that you would see at most of the meetings. So the Cabinet Secretary for Health would be present very frequently. The Deputy First Minister was present a lot, sometimes remotely, because for reasons he would be working from home. Ken Thompson, the Chief Medical Officer, or one of the other medical advisors. But there was a core group who were in St Andrew's House a lot and in a lot of those meetings together.
And you were part of
and
that
I was part
core
of
group?
that, yeah.
Can we turn to your first statement, and it's at paragraph 36, page 9. And here I think you say, "I would not say I advised on the adoption or not of specific NPIs, it's non-pharmaceutical interventions. That was for the clinicians and officials, but I would have given views at certain points on the interpretation of the data, of public mood and compliance, of communications, and where there was politics involved, for example, securing the support of other parties or governments, or impacts on stakeholders such as through border controls on that aspect." So, is it your position that you did not advise on the adoption or not of specific NPIs?
I think when certain NPIs were on the table in that thought partner role, there would be perhaps conversations between myself and the First Minister as to which ones, or exchanges as to which ones to use. That could perhaps be considered advice on the adoption, but it was not, I think what I meant is I didn't decide on the adoption.
Yes, so you advised, but I think your position, I think more accurately, is you didn't make the ultimate decision.
Yes, nor did I sort of say, here is your selected list of NPIs. They would come in proposals from the Chief Medical Officer, for example, and we would then discuss the kind of things that were on the table.
Can we turn to some WhatsApp messages that you have disclosed to the inquiry between yourself and Nicola Sturgeon? I will come back to the circumstances of the disclosure later on. Okay. But first of all, can we turn to INQ 000287766? And we're looking at page 9. And by way of context, the Scottish Government announced the rules that permitted 20 people at funerals, weddings and civil partnerships. And those rules kicked into force on the 14th of September 2020. Mm-hmm. And Nicola Sturgeon was due to announce new restrictions to the Scottish Parliament on the 22nd of September 2020. And in fact, the usual briefing time was changed from 12:15 that day to 2:20 that afternoon. And here we have an exchange of messages. This is shortly before Nicola Sturgeon was due to make the announcement about the new restrictions that day. And this exchange relates to a discussion about whether the rules should be changed for weddings, civil partnerships and funerals. If we start by reading the top message, so Nicola Sturgeon says, and this is on the 22nd of September at 12:09, so shortly before she's due to make the public announcement, we haven't thought about weddings. They are reducing, but not sure what to. And you reply, I think as we only just put them up, just leave it. Then you go on to say, they aren't reducing churches, etc., as far as I know. And I think, though we'll check, that they were higher than us. And then you say, they had 30, we have 20. Then you say, they are going to 15 and 30 at funerals. I think we stay at 20. Does the they in this conversation refer to the UK government?
Yes, it does.
So Nicola Sturgeon in this example tells you at around 12:10, the day that she's due to make the announcement to the public, the usual time being 12:15, but this day we see that it was moved to 2:20. She tells you that she's not sure about what to do. And you tell her to stay with 20 attendees when the UK government has gone down from 30 to 15. And that ultimately becomes the decision that day, because there is no change to the position of 20 as far as the inquiry is aware. So is this not an example of a decision that was made very much at the last minute over WhatsApp between you and Nicola Sturgeon?
So there are a number of aspects to this exchange. The decision, I don't view this as the decision because the decision had been taken. So a decision had been taken at Cabinet to go to 20 through the normal processes. And where the First Minister is saying we haven't thought about weddings, there had been significant thought by, I think, the Communities and Equalities team about what were the appropriate numbers of people at particular services. So that decision had been taken, that decision had gone through the proper process. And I give my view that I don't think we need to essentially remake that decision. I think the message underneath that says that the statement is being forwarded to her, which is, I think, the Prime Minister's statement. And had she still wanted to take further action, she could have come back on that. I also think behind this WhatsApp, if you like, I was having an exchange with the lead official to make sure I had the information correct and that the information I was giving the First Minister was the right information.
Is a decision not to change the rules still a decision?
I think there had been a positive, if you like, and a proactive decision at Cabinet that the position in Scotland was that there would be 20. There is neither a confirmation or, if the First Minister had come back and said, I agree, then I would support your view that that was a decision. She actually doesn't comment, and there may be other actions elsewhere. I don't think it did change from memory until later on. But this, to my mind, is me giving my advice, my thought, in that thought partnership role that we stay at 20. If she had wanted to pursue it, to consider it further, perhaps after receiving the statement she may have, there would be exchanges in some other fashion.
There wasn't any scientific briefing that you received that appears to have informed your view, let's stick with 20, was there?
There would have been on the decision which had very recently, I think that, a day or two before, been taken to set it at 20.
I believe that the decision to move it down to 20 had been taken around maybe the 10th of September, and the decision had come into force on the 14th of September. And what we are talking about is here looking at the 22nd of September, and from the documents that have been disclosed to the inquiry, between the inquiries looked at all of the documents between the 10th of September and the 23rd of September, and the inquiry can see no advice being given between these dates about whether the number should remain at 20 or whether it should go up or down. So is this not an example of a decision simply being made on the hoof shortly before the First Minister is meant to be announcing restrictions?
I would think that advising that shortly before the statement on restrictions was about to be made, that a decision should be taken to change the limit without seeking scientific advice would have been the on the hoof aspect. Suggesting that you stick at the decision that had been taken based on information was a more coherent position.
But we can see that Nicola Sturgeon's first WhatsApp to use, we haven't thought about weddings. That seems to suggest that there wasn't really much thought process that had gone into the decision until this exchange with you, which begins at around 12:10.
No, I think she means we haven't thought about changing weddings, if you like, in response to the UK government changing weddings. We had thought about weddings when the decision had been taken positively and proactively in Cabinet to set the limit at 20.
So is it fair to say that because Nicola Sturgeon comes to you not being sure what to do, and ultimately, as the inquiry has seen, that on this date there was no change to the rules, and you're the one that suggests that we stay at 20, are you effectively the main driver of this decision?
No, I don't think so. If the First Minister has a strong enough mind that if she had felt that my advice was not the right advice, she would have said so, or she would have acted in another capacity, asked for further advice, delayed the position on weddings. She would have acted on that. I am advising. I sought the correct information, if you like, on the factual basis to give that advice, but the decision is very much hers.
If these messages had been deleted by you, and they haven't because that's why we have them, if these messages had been deleted by you, how would the inquiry and the public be able to understand how and why the decision was made at this time not to change the number of people that can attend funerals or weddings?
So, as I've said, in this regard, I have recollection of contacting, I think on Teams, the official responsible for the sort of framework documents, if you like, to check my facts, to check what it was. They would be able to see the decision that was made, which was the decision to stay at 20 being made previously, essentially the decision to set at 20, through the process of advice and Cabinet papers. So that decision would be set out in very great detail. The exchange I will have had with the official will have said the First Minister is asking about weddings. What's the position?
But ultimately, the public, if this message had been deleted, the public would, and the inquiry would not know that the decision ultimately, the First Minister, as at 12:10 that day, wasn't sure what to do. And in fact, within a couple of hours when she announced the restrictions, she'd reached a view that the numbers would not be changed. And all of that had occurred within a very short time, involving a WhatsApp discussion with you. That wouldn't be the sort of insight that the public or the inquiry would have if these messages had been deleted. Is that correct?
I think there may not be the insight into, if you like, the moment of, oh, should we think about this? The sort of the reflection on, is the advice that we have at the moment the correct advice? But they would know why the decision on weddings was that there should be 20 people.
And the reflection is part of the decision-making process, isn't it?
It can be. I think in this it is are the UK doing something that we should be doing? That will be, I would expect to find in notes from officials providing this is what the UK is doing and considering in slower time, perhaps before the next update of the regulations, should we adopt any of this? but that split second, if you like, of indecision would not necessarily be recorded elsewhere.
But so can I just confirm, so do you agree with me that this would be an important part of the specific decision that was under contemplation here on this date, this exchange?
I think if it had been, I don't want to dispute this too strongly, but I don't want to state the importance of this particular decision. There had been every week there was a review of what the decisions were, what the appropriate steps were, what actions should be taken. And they were done in a very meticulous fashion. And there will be occasions where